just want to take my cue for my talk. I guess it's quite different to the preceding four talks, but I'm going to take my cue from Fergus's talk. And he talked about the importance of the human factor and really the motivation for looking at what we call the biomaterials value chain is to see the role of humans and human institutions and the potential impact that change might have over the next number of years. By the way, I do want to acknowledge the contribution of several colleagues who helped put the Foresight, this section of the Foresight report together and assisted me with the slides that I have to present to you here. In particular, Thea Hennessy, Cathal O'Donoghue, Maeve Henshin, and Trevor Donnellan. I hope I haven't left anyone else out, but anyway, they'll tell me later on, I'm sure. Okay, this is a very simple schematic of the biomaterials value chain, which, of course, is made up of several subsystems ranging from the input subsystem to the farm subsystem, processing, distribution, and retail and consumer. Having listened to Fergus's talk, and indeed Martina's talk, I think we should put another link there, the human microbiome at the very end. So then we can talk about moving from farm to gut. I think it might be appropriate after their presentations. Okay, you might say, well, what's the relevance of this theme to a discussion about technology? Well, actually, anyone that has looked at the process of technological change over time, one very obvious factor that emerges is that technological change just doesn't result from innovation in new processes, new products or services. It's not just about the adoption of things. And history has taught us that. If it is any change, as far as I'm concerned, that improves productivity, basically. And if you think about some of the most important technological changes that have occurred throughout history, some of them have resulted from changes in the organization of production. One of the best examples, of course, is Henry Ford's assembly line. Prior to the creation of the assembly line, which involved no new technology, but just the creativity on the part of an extraordinary entrepreneur. It took 14 hours to build a car. After the assembly line, and this was literally true, it took 93 minutes. And there are many other examples of such a development. So I certainly think, and we think, that over the next 20 years or so, there will be significant organizational changes, not only in each link of the food value chain and the wider value chain of the bioeconomy, but there will also be significant changes across the value chain itself, across the various linkages. And that's what I want to talk about for a few moments. Here is perhaps a more realistic version of the food value chain, again in generic form. Here we have the value chain reproduced across the top row there. We've just added a more refined processing sector to reflect primary processing, secondary processing, and packaging, and so on. But what's really important here is to look at the other layers. And the second row there, we have the various products that are produced that feed into each successive link in the chain and that add value, or value is added along the way. We also have the various value chain actors, from the input side through to the farmers, to processors, the consumers, the retail multiples, and so on. And down at the very bottom here, we have the institutional structures that support that value chain. And I've just isolated here 4 of them. We have a research infrastructure, comprising, in the Irish case, the universities, Teagasc, in-company research, the various funders, including the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and so on. Of course, government policy is critical and will influence the adoption of technology and the utilization of technology as well. Most importantly, we have the education and training system that supports the different actors in the different stages of the value chain. And finally, of course, we have to acknowledge the role of international policy, trade agreements, and the Common Agricultural Policy, for example. The other point I want you to note about this simple schema is that the problem with a lot of value chains, and particularly value chains that are not well developed, is that there are a series of silos. In other words, under each link you have a column, if you like, where there's very little interaction. Now in this diagram here we're showing some interaction, some integration. If we look at the horizontal boxes there that straddle a number of linkages. And this really, if you were to look forward to the next 20 and 30 years, the question we're going to ask ourselves, or will be asking, is to what extent can we see more of that integration taking place? Because aside from technology, or taking technology as given, the degree to which integration takes place will have a profound impact on the generation of value right across the chain. And indeed, of course, technology may affect that process itself. Now, I'm moving here to, and I don't expect you to absorb this, it's in the handout, but basically what we've done here is we've populated these various boxes in the case of the dairy value chain. We've illustrated the different products and services that are produced across the chain, the different actors, the vendors of inputs, the farmers, of course, and then the variety of processors. And we've indicated the fact that in some cases, for some companies, there is integration from primary processing right through to branding and marketing. We can see, of course, with the role of the multiples, there's own brand sales and so forth. So there's a degree of integration within this system already. And the question is, what potential changes can we anticipate and what effect might they have? And this is very much a summation of our assessment of where the value chain is in relation to dairy at the moment. There is fairly limited heterogeneity in terms of the production system at farm level. Dairy happens to be the most profitable farm enterprise. Processing is mainly organized through the cooperatives. There is a fair degree of vertical integration de facto. But you still have high levels of fragmentation at the processing end and at the farm end also. It's fair to say there's a high degree of trust between the different actors and coordination across the chain. Some of the most influential changes that have taken place that have transformed the value chain have, of course, occurred in the dairy sector with the development of the PLC concept, which has completely revolutionized the generation of value. I think it's fair to say, and this is a challenge for the future, the level of innovation within this value chain is good to fair, and significant progress is going to be required over the next number of years. The product quality is consistently high, and of course there is a challenge around price volatility, and that is largely exogenous to this system, but greater coordination across the value chain may assist. Businesses in the form of transactions or other business primarily. We have a very, very good collaborative marketing system. The role of ORNU and, of course, the individual companies is impressive. And as far as markets are concerned, mainly EU, but of course now our companies are enjoying global reach. So that's the dairy chain. Moving on to the beef chain, and again, I'm sure many of you might disagree with our characterization of this chain, but again, we have the different actors, different products, and so on, right across the system. A slightly different structure. There is not the same degree of integration across the links, even in those areas where the dairy sector enjoys a certain level of integration. If I might summarize again our assessment of where the value chain is at the present time, it's obvious there is significant heterogeneity at farm level. There's a large number of systems ranging from production of calves to suckler cow systems right through to fattening and everything in between. The sector at farm level is characterized by poor profitability. The Common Agricultural Policy is hugely important in contrast with the dairy sector. The processing activity is mainly conducted by private actors. There is a lot of intra-chain competition. The sector is highly fragmented, both at farm and processing level. I think it's fair to say that there is poor trust across the value chain and a lack of coordination. There are quality variations from time to time. It's a weak innovation system by and large, although there are some exceptional companies. And again, we have price volatility, which may be exacerbated by the relative lack of coordination across the links in the chain. There is limited secondary value-added processing, largely business-to-business transactions, limited branding, at least on a national scale, and the export destinations are primarily EU and UK. So what transformations are possible? Well, one thing we can say is, whatever I say here, it's not going to work out to be the case, because some we can't anticipate. But a number, I think, are important, and that we would certainly, I'm sure all of us involved in the industry, would like to see happening. If I look at the production side, obviously, clearly scale is important. But specialization. If you look at what's happening in dairying, there's increasing outsourcing. The system is becoming much more efficient by farmers concentrating on what they're good at, specializing on their farm system. We would hope to see, or expect to see, much greater collaboration within the farming sector in the form of leasing, share farming, and so on. And even if you look at dairy, and it always surprises me that it's a point that hasn't been really picked up. 1994, about 8% of land farmed in dairying was leased. In 2014, it was 22%. There has been a sea change in access to leased land, but other systems may well come into play. For example, we anticipate you will see much greater, much more multiple farm management, where farm owners will see themselves as entrepreneurs. They will manage a large number of farms. On the processing side, clearly the challenge for the processors is to substantially process a much larger volume of milk and, of course, trade that internationally. There will be greater consolidation. There will have to be more collaboration, and it can take many, many forms, but say in the beef area, we would expect to see much greater formal supply contracts, and in some cases, increase in the level of vertical integration. There has already been fascinating contributions today about the role of the consumer in all of this. And the consumer is no longer a passive agent. The consumer is very much feeding back and influencing developments across the chain. Lifestyle issues. We've heard fascinating insights into the potential development of personalized consumer requirements and supported by new data and big data in the form of wearable sensors and genotyping and so forth. And Fergus has added another one in relation to analysis of the personal, your own microbiome. And of course, the consumer is clearly interested in values-driven consumption. And that's going to be potentially a game changer. I think one of the transformations that has to take place, and we expect to take place, will be around the need for an enhanced innovation capability within food companies in particular. That can happen through own investment. It can happen through the variety of pre-competitive partnerships between the public and the private sector, and of course it can happen through PPPs of various kinds. One of the key potential transformative dimensions in the value chain, right across the value chain, of course, relates to the enhancement of human capital. We can expect significant investment in human capital on the farm, perhaps with a refocus in our educational programs on the entrepreneur and the role of the farmer as entrepreneur. Within our food companies, we certainly need to see greater investment in scientific and innovation capability among food company employees. And finally, I come back to the potential that big data has to offer to improve an already excellent level of traceability, but also to enhance chain efficiency, to enhance trust across the chain, enhance sustainability, and of course, potentially, if you have greater information flows and more advanced information flows, it should affect positively price volatility. And finally, and I think Martina in her presentation identified that very possibly, we can expect to see new value chains emerging outside of the food sector, or in some cases, and in some cases within the food sector. I've just identified a couple of possibilities here. Some of these new value chains may originate on the production side, and I think we might have neglected the potential here. We certainly think there is a possibility for genetic differentiation of raw material supply, say, for example, identifying cows and breeding cows that can produce products with certain characteristics that will add value. So in other words, differentiation can take place at farm level. Of course, the more traditional type of differentiation and the emergence of new value change tends to be associated with the processing side. There are opportunities for extracting higher value in the form of trace chemicals from raw materials, for example, milk. And of course, there is a whole plethora of possibilities in relation to biorefining. And I think the one lesson that we've absorbed in the course of our preparation of the Foresight is the importance of the concept of the circular economy and the importance of implementing the so-called cascade principle in relation to extracting value from our raw materials, be they in the form of human or animal, or raw materials for human or animal feed, be they in the form of aquaculture, be they in the form of wood and so on. One thing we have learned is that we need to refine, to adopt the biorefining principle and extract maximum value from our biomaterials. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I've convinced you that it's not all about technology in the sense that is conventionally understood. That it's very important to think of the role of the human factor and particularly the role of human institutions. That change and transformative change can take place through improvements in human capital and indeed through improvements in relationships that fundamentally involve human beings. Thank you for your attention.